Hello and welcome to another edition of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, as always, Alex, and with me I have Dan. How are you, Dan?
I'm good, Alex. How are you?
I'm very good. Yeah, we've had the week off, well rested during the international break, and we've got a bit of football to look forward to this weekend. So we'll start off with kind of a discussion around the game just before the international break, and then we'll move into a preview of this weekend's game against Wigan. But um, I guess it's a point earned against Millwall rather than two dropped. We sort of talked last week about the fact that, it's a hard place to go, and if we could get a point out of the game, it'd be a good result. But I guess the manner of it was reasonably promising without really setting the world on fire. But I guess disappointing late on with Magennis getting sent off as well. So a sort of a mixed bag of a game, I guess.
Yeah, it was a it was definitely a weird game. I think if but like if you could take the performance the way we played and the performance that we put out, you would probably actually expect to have actually won that game. But just with the weird circumstances that surrounded it, with like Terrell coming on and then going back off within 2 minutes,
Yeah.
and just strange. Strange little moments like that, which at a, a wasted sub is never, it's never good. It's never good, let alone in a division like the championship, and in a tight game like that. I guess it would be a different story if you're up 3-0 and Terrell comes on and then goes off. You can probably manage, but when it's close like that, it's particularly damaging. And I think when you consider that and how the game ended, we did remarkably well to still hold on for that point.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we essentially finished the game with 9 men with that Terrell injury, and then obviously injuries down back didn't help either with Burke and Pennington picking up knocks as well. So it sounds as if, from what McGann said, that they'll be fit for the game against Wigan, but I guess it's concerning given the probably the lack of depth in the squad at the moment, that it's a bit concerning that we're sort of picking up those sorts of knocks and injuries. And I know Dan Batty was announced as being sort of you know, not an overly serious, but a prolonged absence with that ankle injury. Whether he's back this week or next week, I'm not sure, but it sounded like it was probably a bit of a problematic one. Um, so not the sort of thing you want to be picking up when we don't have a huge squad to begin with. I guess on the positive sides of things, Grzycki with an absolutely incredible goal from near the halfway line, probably an early contender for goal of the season.
Yeah, it was it was a crazy goal. It was amazing. When he lined up to take it, I mean, I didn't really foresee it happening, but there's no. I don't ever believe there are people out there saying that it was a cross gone right, or whatever. But
No,
I
no, no,
don't
no.
really, I don't believe it for a second. I think he's a kind of the kind of player who is willing to, you know, try try the spectacular. And I think he just got it. He got it just right. And you know, I think in terms of the rest of the game, he played really well a, as a whole. It wasn't just that he pulled out one moment of magic. I think he was dangerous throughout, and we were unlucky probably to not score a couple. But
Yeah, I mean, he's the sort of guy that I think would try that sort of thing. I don't think you can really say it was a cross gone wrong. I think he definitely meant to go for that shot and really sort of struck it sweetly. I did like during the last week, I think McGann was caught on film during training, also scoring quite a long range free kick, and Grzycki sort of came back to him with a comment about it as well, saying, not as good as mine or something like that, which I thought was kind of fun to see. You don't often see, I guess you'll see more and more these days with managers, but I guess it's been a bit rare up until now to have managers on social media as well. I guess we first experienced it with Adkins and now McGann as well, but it's kind of funny seeing that back and forth between manager and players. Um, I guess the main talking point, or one of the main talking points as well, was Eves getting dropped up forward for Magennis to start the game. What did you make of that? Do you sort of agree that it was probably the right idea to take him out of the limelight and give Magennis a go? I mean, Magennis had played quite well in the cup, um, but whether that'll help Eves sort of kind of get his mind straight, or whether that could actually make things worse.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know we talked about it last time about how well Magennis, how he'd taken his chance in the cup, and performed really well, and he'd probably earned some game time. I didn't really think that it was going to come in a start in that last game right before the international break. It seems like a weird time to make that drop because you leave Eves with two weeks or whatever, a long time to wait before he gets that opportunity to try and to earn his spot back, or to if now that Magennis is suspended, that Eves gets that spot back, but he's had to wait now so long between that time.
Yeah, yeah. So it'll be interesting to see. I guess, especially with the news now that Dicko's been let go on loan, guess it almost makes it his position by default this weekend. It's an interesting one. Um, I guess, yeah, I guess now we can move on to talk about the transfer window that did close just after that game against Millwall, where I guess there was sort of speculation that Milinkovic and Henriksen were both going to be let go, and we did a bit of shopping around for them. Nothing materialized in the end for them. What do you sort of make of that, and how do you see their positions in the squad? I mean, it's a little bit of an awkward situation where they're, I guess, sort of welcomed back into the squad. It's not as if they're not going to play, but they've clearly been told that they don't have a place, or that there's no sort of place for them at the club. And now I guess we just sort of have to make one for them.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation because I feel like for the most part, when when a club sets a player sort of aside and says, look, you know, we probably don't see your future here. We're bringing in replacements. Take your opportunity to go when it comes. It's not that often that like that it doesn't the player doesn't sort of take advantage of that opportunity to go somewhere and take up a new contract elsewhere. Let alone to have two players be in the same situation at the same club at the same time, and neither of them able to move on. I feel like I think it's going to be. I don't know. It's an interesting one. I think Henriksen has the class that he would be able to step back into the team easier, but there's also now more obstacles for him to get into the team. Um, in terms of Milinkovic, if he knuckles down and trains, for all intents and purposes, he can't be any worse off than Josh Bowler in terms of the pecking order. They're sort of both stuck behind Grisicky and Bowen, and it's going to be whoever trains is training the best. But I feel like there's a little bit more depth in the center of the park, that a few more players that Henriksen's got to push past. But I mean, he still managed to get. He hasn't played for what?
Basically all season. I mean, he
Yeah,
played for
he played
Norway
some
during the week.
preseason, but yeah, that's what I was going to say. He hasn't played in all that time since preseason, which is what's it, about 6 weeks ago or something.
Yeah.
And they sat him out for the first game for Norway, but he made his 50th cap in the 1-1 with Sweden, which is their sort of local derby in terms of internationals. So the fact that the trust is still there for him after not playing for so long, I think speaks volumes of his quality. And I'd have no um, I have no problems if he can work his way back in and play, because he was so good for us last season, to be fair. So I don't think any of that's lost. He's come out and said that now that he's here and he knows that he's here, he's committed to the club and committed to making us successful this year. And I feel like he's a pretty honest sort of a player, and I'd be willing to take his word on that.
Yeah, and I think the way it's sort of unfolding, where we seem to be, because of our pressing game style and the high intensity of it, having those midfield options to rotate through that three-man midfield is actually quite useful. And obviously, we've got Lopez, who's essentially the Henriksen replacement. We've got Batty, we've got Irvine, we've got Stewart. is sort of the four or five, and Honeyman of course as well. So the 5 or 6 man rotation in that sort of 3 man midfield. But obviously now with Batty injured, someone like Irvine coming back from a pretty long trek for international duty as well. Um, Honeyman's sort of been in and out of the side as well with small injuries. Having that extra body is actually quite important, I think. Um, so it's not as if there isn't a place for him. I don't think he's been as replaced as some would suggest. Milinkovic is probably the one who's less likely to get a position in the side. I think, especially with Bowler as that depth player, makes it a bit tougher for him. Um, I guess the interesting one as well was Nuadiko being allowed to leave on loan to Vitesse, where he's uh, joined back up with Slutsky. Um, Interesting in the sense that we've only got now two recognised strikers on the books. Phil Buckingham in the last day or so has also said that we're currently trialling Norbert Baloch, I think is how you would pronounce that. He's a Hungarian forward, was at Palermo in Serie B, but I think they've been expelled from that league for a few different reasons, and as a result, all of their players are now available on a free transfer. So we've been trialing him. Um, he's sort of he's a tall, kind of lanky forward. I think he's sort of been called the Hungarian Peter Crouch. So had a decent enough record in the Greek league, I believe, when he was there on loan. And of course, it's the club that we signed Abel Hernandez from. So a bit of a pedigree coming from there for us as well. So that'll be an interesting one. I think it's a no-brainer that we need to bolster our striking options. And I sort of assumed that we had someone in mind when we let Dicko go on loan, so it was a little bit surprising that we haven't signed anyone to this point. But what did you make of Dicko being let go?
Um, it kind of caught me off guard, to be honest. I didn't actually expect him to go, but um, I don't know. I guess like his scoring record over the like in the course of the time he's been here has sort of is it's not anything to be um amazed at. So yeah, it is interesting. I think as you mentioned with the lack of depth there, I think the only like benefit that I can see, I guess, is it potentially opens the door, at least maybe for a little while, until if we do, sign one of the many free agent players, that maybe it opens the door for Keen Lewis Potter to get a little bit of game time in the championship. But I think, I mean, like Dicko going to Vitesse and reuniting with Slutsky. I mean, I wish him all the best. I hope he has a successful time there and gets back into some goal scoring form and just has a good time. Because I mean, to be fair, he probably hasn't had a great time at City, but he's never shirked his responsibility and he's never had a bad word to say about the club. So
Yeah, yeah. I guess he was an interesting signing, and people were a bit surprised when you look at the stats and you hear that he was signed for 3.5 million, which, um, eh, considering that was only 2 years ago and that was Will back in the championship, that's a lot of money to be outlaying on a player who, with no disrespect to Dicko, I guess when you're hearing that sort of sum of money, you're sort of hoping for a little bit more of a return on it. Um, I guess the only other one in the squad who's probably comparable in terms of a large outlay on our return to the championship is Kevin Stewart. And of course, he was pretty underwhelming to start with, but has now settled in fantastically well. So, um, I guess it's interesting when you look back on some of the signings that we were making at the time. I guess Irvine would be another one. I think he was a couple of million. But we didn't have a whole lot of money at the time, and to be splashing out that sort of money, I guess it's a bit disappointing with how it's panned out. But certainly wish him all the best in Vitesse. We'll look ahead now to the game on Saturday against Wigan, and it's great news here in Australia that it's televised, so it's more readily available than it otherwise would have been. Of course, having Tigers TV would have meant that we would have been able to access it anyway, but being on BN Sports here, as well as KO, makes it very easily accessible. Huge game against Wigan. I mean, they're 22nd in the table, so they're 2 spots below us, and home game means there's really no excuses to not get 3 points against them. We really need to get the 3 points on the board and start moving up the table.
Yeah, I think we sort of, I mean, there's been a lot of comparisons in, Hull Daily Mail and things about where we sit compared to last year, and I think we're only 1 point better off than we were at this point last season. But the point was made, like last year, we still managed to get within touching distance of the playoffs. So I think you're like we do need to be picking up points now, and I think with the international break, and a bit of extra time training and working on those combinations and working on the style of play and getting everyone just up to speed and gelling together a bit more as well. Hopefully, I think we should start to see some of these positive performances getting turned into points.
I guess the lineup will be quite interesting. Magennis out suspended, as we sort of touched on, which I guess hands a start to Eves. In terms of our defence, I guess that's the other big sort of focal area where we might see a change. With Pennington lined up, I think, at right back against Millwall, and then we had Lehigh at left back. Of course, we could switch Lehigh to right back and maybe start Fleming. If Device and Burke are both fit, I think they're probably the number one choices there. And I guess the other decision to be made is in midfield. If Irvine is potentially a bit leggy from his journey back from his time with the Socceroos, whether we see Henriksen thrown in straight away, whether we see Lopez get a start, could be quite interesting. I guess those are sort of the two main areas of decision making.
Yeah, I think I probably can't really see Henriksen coming straight back in, but I mean I can see like he would absolutely do the job if he was thrown in. I just don't know if McCann would, after being like out for so long, just
Yeah.
to go, you're at the bottom of, we have no use for you. Essentially, I've signed your replacements, and then go, oh, you're still here. Okay, back in the first 11. It's a bit of a, it'd be interesting stance to take, but yeah, I think yeah, Eves obviously is going to have to come in for Magennis, otherwise you're overlooking Eves and throwing someone like Keane Lewis Potter in to start, and I think if Eves' confidence wasn't damaged beforehand, it certainly would be by a decision like that. But yeah, maybe if Pennington's still unfit, then I guess someone like Fleming in at left back and pushing Lehigh back across makes sense. I think, and I think you're right with in terms of I guess it'll be a conversation that will be had with Jackson when he arrives back in Hull in regards to whether he is comfortable to start or whether he starts on the bench or sits out the game entirely. But I dare say that it would probably be that midfield three of Stewart, Irvine, and Honeyman to start. I probably wouldn't be surprised to see Henriksen sit on the bench. Even though I just said that he won't come straight back in, but just
I guess they've got to start easing him back in
yeah,
sooner
and I
rather than
think
later. You want to give him some legs and get him involved.
yeah, and I think it's hard to. There comes a point, he's here now. He's here until at least January, and it would be a strange, silly decision just to sit him on the sidelines and not utilize him when the quality possesses, where he sits within the squad. He's he's captain last year. He's a well-respected, hard-working midfielder. So I think sooner rather than later he will start to be more involved in come match day.
What's your score prediction for this one?
Wigan score prediction. Look, I think it's probably. I think we can go a 2-1 win. To be honest, I think I'm still not completely sold by the defense at all times. And we look better than we have in the past, but we still sort of look like we get a little bit exposed out wide fairly regularly. and particularly and not it's not meant to be a slant against Fleming. He's a good up and coming young fullback, but on with a couple of young guys that have him and Mackenzie, I think when they've come in, they have at times been a little bit exposed by just more experienced players or potentially a little bit of lack of cover from some of their more senior teammates. But um, I think we offer enough going forward, and I think I saw something the other day, some stat that we are, I think, like equal eighth in terms of chance creation in the league at the minute. It's just the converting those is where we're falling down, but I think our midfield is starting to, they're getting in the rhythm, and they're chipping in a little bit. Um, Irvine's chipped in. Stewart should have chipped in against Millwall. Um, but yeah, I think, and I know Honeyman can score a couple of goals, so I think, yeah, I'm tipping a 2-1 victory.
Yeah, I mean, looking at Wigan's last month, they haven't been too high scoring, so I would be hopeful that if we're going to get a shutout, it would be in this game. So I'd be hoping for something like a 2-0 win. Um, the last element of this game that we can't leave unspoken is, of course, it's the return of David Marshall to the KCOM, which will be interesting in and of itself. Coming up against a lot of his former teammates, it'll be an interesting one. I guess, you know, whether we come up against Fraser Campbell in a couple of months remains to be seen. I suspect he'll probably be in the lineup for Huddersfield, but Marshall's probably the first former player that we've come up against in a little while. Most of our former players have migrated to the Premier League or other leagues. What do you think the reception will be for him? I would suspect it's going to be a pretty positive one, given the way that he sort of turned his City career around.
Yeah, I would see no reason why he wouldn't receive a warm reception at the KCOM. I think, over the last couple of seasons, we've been able to see, um, I guess, what we expected when he first signed. We knew what he was capable of, but he had a bit of a rough start to his Hull City life. So no, but I think the fans will remember him well, and they will show their appreciation for his time with us on the weekend.
Um, and I guess now we can look ahead to we can look back at our football flashback, which was a 4-1 win over Millwall back in the 2012-2013 season, if I'm not out by a year there. Yeah, 2012-2013. Sounds right. Yes, it was. It wasn't the season before that. Under Bruce, where we really sort of started to kickstart a promotion push early that season. We'd beaten Bolton 3-1 the week um, before the international break, and then knocked off Millwall 4-1 at home. Um, I guess the main thing that's really interesting to me out of this one, and I tweeted about it a little bit earlier, was it just amazes me that say Olofinjana was in our lineup when um, I sort of associate him with our relegation season from the Premier League a few years earlier, and he was one of those players where he was on a big money contract, and obviously with the club in a bit of financial trouble at the time, guys like Zayati, Gardner. Um, Giovanni, all those sorts of guys that were big parts of that Premier League season or Premier League era, Jimmy Bullard as well, all sort of slipped out of the club one way or the other, whether it was a free transfer, whether it was um, basically, being released or whatever. So the fact that he was still around when I sort of associate that season under Bruce as the first season of that new crop of Premier League players. So even though they'd been at the club for maybe 6 or 12 months before that, you had your David Milers, your Robbie Brady's, your James Chesters, your El Mohammadi, Quinn, Aluko, Corrin, all those guys who, yes, they'd kind of come together at various points over the previous few seasons, but that was the sort of the season that they were all at the club. It's kind of weird to associate a player from that former era with still being there during that one. Um, of course, the other one who I don't think played in this game, but um, Andy Dawson. was still at the club as well. So I think he was also sort of, I guess, the last link to that former era as well. But yeah, very very interesting that Olofinjana started in that one. But um, it was interesting looking back at the highlights, I guess. It was great to sort of see um, the team in full flight and free scoring and really sort of attacking it and yeah, getting that sort of momentum started on that push for promotion. And Jay Simpson and Sonny Aluko, it's hard not to feel a bit frustrated looking back at the start of that season and how free scoring Aluko was, and feel a bit of frustration at the way that his City career was very much cruelled with those Achilles injuries, I think it was. Um, that he not only suffered in that season, but then again in the Premier League season the following year, because he started that season in a very similar fashion. And we sort of talked a couple of weeks ago about that Newcastle 3-2 result where he scored a pretty spectacular winner. Um, and sort of, he promised a lot, and unfortunately his body let him down on so many occasions. But yeah, I guess it's great sort of looking back on that side in full flight with, your Stephen Quinn and your El Mohammedi's also really kind of coming to life.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this game before we came on air, and I mentioned that this was coincidentally like right before I started following Hull. So I'm not familiar with the game, but I am familiar with most of the players. I never saw um, Amos in goal for us, but I do remember almost all of that starting 11. I've got some. I think I always liked Aluko as a player, and I think you're right. He's just unlucky with injuries, and he never. I mean, I never really saw him fully hit his straps, but I think by the time I sort of came in, he was sort of he was a bit on the outskirts of the or the peripherals of the squad, but and that was possibly with due to injury and stuff. But I think he sort of as I began to follow, he was sort of fading out of his City career. But no, I think there's there's some definitely some fond memories of some of those players in that from that team.
Yeah, and I guess it's interesting sort of seeing sort of the foundations put in place for that Premier League season where you think, apart from Amos in goal, I guess Faye at centre back, even though he sort of stuck around and was there in that first Premier League season, I guess you say you replaced him with Curtis Davies in the centre back position, Amos in goal with McGregor. Dudgeon at left back with, I guess, originally Figueroa in that first season, but then obviously Andy Robertson. That team isn't, miles away from the side that kept us up in that Premier League season. Obviously, the main additions were Huddleston and Livermore in that central midfield, and then a bit later on, Jelavic and Long up top. But yeah, that side isn't miles away from a side that kept us in the Premier League, which is kind of amazing that you think the building blocks were put in place so early in that campaign. I think really the only one who might not have quite joined by that point was David Myler, and he would have, I'm sure, only joined a couple of weeks later at most, um, unless I'm not mistaken. The thing is that the rules around loan players have changed so much over the years. It's hard to um, remember when players joined based on that, but I think he might have originally joined on one of those short-term loans that you could get back in the day with like, an 8-week loan or whatever. And before making it a permanent switch, I think in January. Um, yeah, so okay, so it looks like he joined in November. Yeah, okay, so a bit, a couple of months after this game. Um, so because he went out on loan um, from 8th of November till January. So that's like a 2-month sort of loan. And then I guess he signed on a permanent deal um, that January, yeah, on the 8th of January 2013. So just after that loan would have expired. So um, he was sort of that last building block to be put in place that season. As far as the Premier League players, I guess George Boyd signed a bit later in that season, and we had a few others kind of come in and out of the side. But yeah, it's kind of interesting looking back on that lineup and thinking how many of those players then ran out in the Premier League for us the following season. But Um, I guess the other remarkable thing about that game, or frustrating in a way, was we were 4-0 up at half time in that game, and you sort of thought that it could really become sort of a blowout demolition sort of game. And then in the second half, Millwall scored, and that was it. So it was a 4-1 result, which I guess you don't see too often, but I guess to some extent, when you're already up 4-0 at half time, you kind of tend to put the cue in the rack.
Yeah, I think when you go in 4-0 up at half time, I guess it would be it's hard to motivate the players to sort of to go and lift another gear like you would normally. And if the game was closer, you would be trying to motivate them to go and put the game to bed. But at 4-0, you sort of would expect the game's already um, sort of the result would be decided just about, barring a miracle. So um, yeah, it's an interesting one, and it is definitely interesting looking back at that squad and thinking about just the different things that some of those guys were a part of. Like there's a few of those guys that were in our FA Cup final game.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so
Quinn playing
um,
a huge part in that FA Cup final,
mm,
and starting in this one. Bruce as well,
yeah,
Chester, um,
so,
yeah, it's, and I feel sometimes like I think in the last year or so we've got that back a little bit, where we've got that nucleus starting to grow in the squad. I think for a little while it was a bit concerning that the squad was changing so drastically year on year. But now when you look at the squad and you see, so Burke and Device have now been our centre backs for 12 months, just about. You've got, Irvine and Stewart in midfield have basically been there the whole time. And then obviously Grzycki and Bowen on the wings. It's good to have that sort of core part of the squad. So I think when the players talked last season about, needing to gel before they could go on that decent run, I think we've got that a little bit more this season. And I guess you sort of hope if slash when Grzycki and Bowen go, we can find some adequate replacements and we don't sort of see half the squad leaving at the same time.
yeah, I guess that's the concern. But I just hope that they have sort of, I guess, again with that international break now, just had that chance to gel a little bit more, and that they'll come out on the weekend and just show what they're about. Because we sort of know, but it's sort of been just in a few moments in different games where they've really showed it. I'd just like them to be able to go out for 90 minutes and just say what they got to say with the ball at their feet.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully we can kick that all off with a win this weekend against Wigan. Thank you for joining me, Dan.
No worries.
And thank you everyone for listening this week. You've been listening to The Tigers Down Under, and we'll be back this time next week. So until then, come on, City. You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
This is on fire. We're going higher and higher. There's no turning back 'cause you're out.